for your question, Vivian. I think it's interesting the way that these things are developed, because when I was in school, which actually wasn't that long ago, that was definitely the issue that I saw. You know, I'd pick up a cover of Dolly magazine and I'd kind of flick through it and I'd look at all these, particularly the makeup tips. I mean, they just weren't designed for people with my skin tone. And no doubt, as an ethnic minority, you've kind of found that issue where you're just kind of looking at these magazines and you're like, none of these women look like me. And I absolutely think that that's something that's important. But I think the other thing is that it's really, really changing, and it's only going to, I guess, change more and become more representative and more diverse as, you know, the demographics of societies change. Like in the United States, for example, like their racial demographics are shifting heavily in the next 10 to 20 years. You know, in Australia, we've got more and more people from ethnic minority backgrounds, particularly ethnic minority women, who are occupying places occupying places in the public sphere, in Parliament, and I think that those things are getting better. I think that actually one of the things that has improved as well is the way that schools educate and inform students on how to be literate around the media. And I think that sort of started, you know, when I was in school, and I think that it was kind of to the point where I was just kind of like, yeah, I've heard all this before. I don't need to be told about it. But, you know, perhaps some schools aren't doing as well as others. But I do think that it is important, and I think and I hope that it is changing. And I think the one way that we can perhaps hurry it along a bit is to have kind of more diversity, more representation in the public square.
Now, Mark Butler wanted to... I'll come back to the question in a moment. She has a hand up. Mark Butler wanted to jump in as a father of daughters.
Well, I was at high school a lot longer ago, and I've got a slightly stronger view about this. I think our cultural industries, entertainment, magazines and so on have improved in terms of diversity, but I don't think they have in terms of body image around weight. I think the sorts of editions... Is that what they're called? Yes. Of Cosmo and others that you're talking about, Marina, are the exception rather than the rule. And I think still there is too much of a gap between the sort of idealised female image in magazines and the reality. There's too much of a gap. And every youth survey that we do every year shows that this rates in the top 3 personal concerns of young people. And as I go back to thinking about myself as a teenage boy back in the 1980s, this was a very significant issue for young girls I was growing up with. At the less serious end, in terms of a loss of self-esteem and self-confidence, at more serious end, you know, poor diet and so on, and at the very serious end, eating disorders, which are the mental illness type which has the highest mortality rate. This is a very significant issue, and I think we've got to understand that cultural industries, magazines, entertainment industries project a cultural bias or a cultural norm that influences the community. And over the years, we've seen some of those negative biases or norms start to wash out of the system. The old idea of smoking being cool, that was still a cultural norm back when I was young, that's gone. A whole lot of issues around race, around gender, around sexuality, they've gone. But I just don't think the industry has done enough around the question of the female form. I think it's still a very dangerous bias that the magazine industry perpetuates.
Go bashe our questioner. She had a hand up there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with the Shadow Minister. I was about to ask, do the panellists think that it's important for the industry to promote an image that is neither on neither of the extreme ends, because the industry often wants to compensate for the stick-thin models with, plus-size models or models of different body shapes, but never actually have a representation of the majority of women in magazines.
Yeah, Marina, that's for you.
Yeah. So again, I would, you know, clearly the industry has a long way to go. I completely agree with that. However, it has moved a lot since the stereotypes that we keep talking about. So I'm not sure how many of you have looked at a magazine lately, and I won't ask everyone to go and buy my magazines again. But I would encourage you to go and have a look, because a lot of good work is being done. And
I think people are recalling what they've seen over many years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you'd have to say the industry doesn't have a great record in that regard.
No, well, the history is not so great, but the future is looking a bit brighter because we do actually have discussions around diversity. So, you know, it is an issue for us, and we need to be representative of the community, because if not, we will die as an industry. You know, I mean, you're not going to keep, you know, particularly now the conversation has moved on a lot. You know, most people are talking about it and have an issue with it. So we actually do need to do something about it, and we are doing something about it. I honestly can tell you that the magazines are more diverse, offer more diversity with regard to also, race, body shape, everything in magazines now than when I started, 30 years ago.
Eva wants to jump in very briefly.
A very brief point, because I think your point about normality is actually important, because I do think, yes, we get diversity, but as you say, it's often not normal, and it's actually being able to look at every picture and being able to see people that are normal rather than very slim and also then maybe fatter, so that that term normal has to be hung on to as a really important criterion.
People come in all shapes and sizes, and so there isn't really no one normal.
No, but
Okay.
and in fact that's what we're trying to get away from.